Hello, everyone. Welcome to Promethean Action's live question and answer show. My name is Adam Sturman. I'm a producer here with Promethean Action, joined with the lovely Barbara Boyd and Susan Kokinda. Welcome, everyone, and what a week it has been. I thought last week was intense. This week is getting more intense, and we have a full show lineup for you today, hitting all the major issues I think everyone wants us to cover. And I'm going to begin by setting the stage. I know there's so much to discuss about the details about what's going on with the ongoing war with Iran. And so I'm going to set the stage by just playing a quick recap from Donald Trump, and we're going to take some other clips here. So let's begin with Trump.
With Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran is not happy right now. Should have been done 47 years ago. Should have been done at least during the 47-year period. And it wasn't. Other presidents didn't do what was right. They should have done it a long time ago. It would have been much easier. And they want to settle so badly. They don't like what we're doing. And they do want to settle. We'll find out whether or not we settle with them or we just finish it off. But I want to thank Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. He's been amazing. Pete, thank you very much. Great job. The country is booming, and we'll have Iran defeated soon. They'll be defeated very soon. And then I guess it'll be even better. But, you know, even during this, it's been amazing. I mean, to think, so I call it a military operation, but I call it whatever you want. It's incredible. It's like it hasn't made a dent. A lot of people thought oil would go up to $350 a barrel, and today it's at $79. A couple of days ago, it was at 68. It went up a little bit because I had to take tough action because they did not obey what they're supposed to obey. I mean, they just didn't do it. So we took a little action, but it'll all, when that settles down, I think you're going to have $55 oil, which is all.
All right. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. Thank you, Karen, for the super chat. Melissa, thank you very much. Melissa, again, thank you very much. And Melody Hart, so great to see you. Thank you for joining us today. All right, we have plenty more clips. Before I get to the clips, please drop us a like. And I'm going to start a poll here. So give us a vote and let me know what you guys think. What's the most important topic right now to you that we should be covering in the show? So let us know in the chat which topic we should be covering, 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the chat. So I have another clip here from Stephen Miller, and then we're going to take one from J.D. Vance here. So here's Stephen Miller.
Yes, well, obviously, look, as the president has said all along, the people of Iran, the citizens of Iran, have an obligation to chart the future that they feel is best and right for themselves. But again, to the underlying point that we've been discussing, there are individuals with the military and otherwise who obviously want to be opponents and obstacles to peace. But it's actually a sign of how successful President Trump's policy has been that you have these fractures and fissures inside the country. In other words, that's proof the strategy is working. For 47 years, Sean, there wasn't an inch of daylight. There wasn't any crack. Now you have these giant canyon-sized fissures as the country is fighting amongst itself for its future. And the point is that America is saying, get your act together, get behind the peace program, de-nuke, get rid of the nuclear weapons, and you can have any future you want. But we have to bring it back to that fundamental issue, Sean. As President Trump said at the beginning, the #1 state sponsor of terror cannot possess the world's deadliest weapons. President Trump is taking action today to present an unimaginable fate tomorrow. And for that, he should be endlessly applauded.
By the way, congratulations again to your family for your new addition.
Any thoughts on that one? And then actually, we're going to take this one here from J.D. Vance, where he hits it from the neocon angle, because we have a lot of neocons that are pushing this line in the United States still.
What is their proposal? The people that think you shouldn't negotiate with Iran.
I think that their proposal is to bomb and bomb and bomb. And the honest view, Joe, is that they do not actually have a solution. If you actually ask them, what do you want us to do? What is the goal that you're trying to achieve? You know, they'll say things like, we'll just bomb them to oblivion. Okay, we can do that. We can drop a lot of bombs, But what does that accomplish if there's still a crazy person who's still unwilling to shoot a few drones at the Strait of Hormuz? What the president has done, I think very, very capably, is said, we're going to use military force in this situation when it's connected to something we're trying to achieve. So if you shoot at ships, we're going to shoot at the facilities at which you used to shoot at the ships. But we're not just going to do something open-ended indefinitely. We're not just going to bomb and bomb and bomb. We're going to try to use our military force as one of the many tools that we have to solve the problem. And obviously, like, I'm biased, but I think that's exactly the right approach. I actually, you have to read between the lines a little bit, because if you look at what Mike Pence or some of the conservative hawks, like people who voted for us but have been very critical of me, very critical of the administration, if you actually look at what they're proposing, they just want the military campaign to go on forever, and they can't actually identify what it is that they're trying to accomplish. None of them can identify what it is they're trying to accomplish. And I read two things between the lines. I think some of them want us to accomplish a complete change in the government of Iran, to topple the clerics and to replace those clerics with somebody who's, much friendlier. But like, look, what is our experience with doing that? It's
not
awful.
good.
It's not good, right? And so, like, if the Iranian people want to rise up and change their government, that's up to them. But we're not going to send 150,000 ground troops in order to accomplish a change in a regime unless the people on the ground themselves want to accomplish that outcome. Now, we're not going to send the troops in regardless, but like, to propose sending in the troops, you're basically saying that the U.S. military should do the job for the Iranian people. We're not in that business anymore. We're just not. And then I think a second outcome that people are, whether they're aware of it or not, is what I call the Libya outcome. So if you look at the end result of our Libya policy after Gaddafi was killed by the Obama administration, by the way, again, a very stupid decision, what happened? Libya basically turned into a failed state. You had a refugee crisis. You had people pouring into Europe, pouring into other parts of Asia, other parts of Africa. You had a lot of violence, a lot of terrorism come from that. I do think that there are people who would like that to be the outcome in Iran. But then I say, again, what is in our interest? How is it in the United States' interest to have 94 million desperate people flooding into Europe, flooding into the United States, to have sort of the terrorist infrastructure that can get established when you fan terrorists all over the world? We've run this experiment before. And so our policy right now, what we're trying to accomplish is get the straits open, ensure the free flow of oil and gas, obviously want to keep the Iranians from having a nuclear weapons program, and using the tools of diplomacy and military power to accomplish that.
Barbara and Susan, the stage has been set.
All right. I mean, what people don't understand, since we've lived through all of these horrendous forever wars, is the idea of how can you have a war to accomplish peace, which is what Trump is doing. It's the way we used to think about war, particularly in World War II. In my video, I pointed to the types of strategic thinking that MacArthur did in terms of Japan. What he did was he strangled them economically, he isolated them, and he used military force very surgically to actually go after their key deployments and their key strategic assets. And that is exactly what the president has done. Before this operation, you had the Gulf countries and playing to what's called the Arab Street. In other words, what do their populations actually say? They hate Israel, and so therefore they were caught in this vice of kind of a forever Middle East contest set up by the British very deliberately with the Sykes-Picot Treaty and everything the British have done in the Middle East. Since the war or operation happened, they've all switched sides. And the keystone development was Trump's announcement yesterday that based on our keeping the Strait of Hormuz open with our military, they will now be making billions of dollars of investments in the United States. That's a very different policy than anything we've experienced before. And it's exactly the outcome which is dictated by our national security strategy. And if people haven't read that, every clip that we just played is coming out of that very revolutionary document. What did it say? It said all the people who set up these forever wars were stupid. They believed that America could be the world's policeman forever. That's obviously not the case. That's obviously going to destroy us, and it's a position we were put in to destroy us. And we only will intervene in foreign conflicts on two principles. One, does it actually threaten us, which clearly Iran having a nuclear weapon does? And second, how do we actually use the strategy to benefit the American working class, which is really the fundamental shift, which you never heard before from anybody in the State Department or in foreign policy circles. So that's a big deal. And, you know, the Gulf countries actually coming in and saying, we're going to invest in the United States because you're using your military power to help our economies and our trade with you and our trade with the world in terms of oil and gas. This has now come home to roost, and we're saying we can actually point the working class to the fact that these new factories are going to be built by money coming out of this operation. So that's how I think people have to start to think about this. Trump is a master of it. He actually looks at these things and comes with an out-of-the-box solution, which most people haven't thought about before, but actually build on things he's been thinking about, particularly in terms of Iran. I traced it back to 1984 when I looked at his statements about this. So as opposed to Bibi Netanyahu actually controlling him on this, he was saying this even before Bibi Netanyahu was in office in Israel, in terms of what he thought the problem was. All of what most people don't know is all of the forever wars which we experienced were based on the fact that we had gutted our economy. They knew it, and therefore we were not in a position to actually even wage this operation as an economy. You need to win wars. You need logistics in depth, and you need a big defense industrial base to actually win wars. We couldn't take on Iran, and they admitted it. So instead, we decided to take on Iraq, which was a weakling in the entire situation, and did stupid things with the idea of, oh, they'll see American power in the Middle East, and then everybody will change and become Democrats. That was the insanity of the whole forever war process. So I think Trump is right. This is going to end very soon. And it's probably going to end by the people in Iran actually splitting and the IRGC going bankrupt, and probably some kind of thing going on in the country itself, where, as JD said, the people have to choose. We can't choose for them. So that's how I'd wrap up the entire controversy around the war. And it completely throws the British out of the Middle East. I mean, that is something which is just phenomenal.
Susan?
Well, I actually want to segue to the next clip from Donald Trump, but I'm going to do it from the following standpoint. I saw the poll as it was popping up, and I'm going to be a complete contrarian because of the three name choices: the war, election integrity, and the economy. The economy got 0. I'm going to tell you that's a problem. Because the way that we're going to win the midterms and the way that Donald Trump is going to have the ability to reshape the world as a world of sovereign nations against the British financial system is what he is doing with the U.S. economy. So, Adam, if you could play that clip.
Hold on for 1 second. I actually closed it, but it's in my clipboard.
This is, there was a defense, as intro, there's a defense industrial base summit in Pennsylvania yesterday, organized largely by Senator McCormick. The president was there, Pete Hegseth was there, a whole lot of people were there, and these are a few of the salient clips from the president.
But we're here today to celebrate a colossal victory for this Commonwealth and for the entire nation. This afternoon, we're announcing nearly $10 billion of new investments in our defense industrial base right here in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And these investments will create more than 4,000 jobs. Pennsylvania workers will build the ships, submarines, trucks, weapons, and industries that will ensure America remains the strongest and most powerful nation in the history of the world. We're doing better now than we've ever done. We have $19.2 trillion. We used to go million, then we went billion, now we're into the trillions. But we're also reasserting the fundamental truth: to be a strong nation, you must be a manufacturing nation, manufacturing jobs. But this year alone, we've added 18,000 new manufacturing jobs, and that number could go up by 10 and 15 times as these factories begin to open, including, remember Obama used to say, you'll never have another manufacturing job in the United States. Can you imagine? And these are the best jobs. These are the highest paying jobs. They're the best jobs.
So, and Adam, if you can share, pull up that screen share that I've got there. Okay. The president spoke, and so did a bunch of industry leaders. But it was like a fire hose in terms of how much is going into Pennsylvania alone, because they have a Republican senator who actually gets it. I mean, they have a Democratic governor. He's not as batshit crazy as, the one I have here in Michigan. So maybe he doesn't get in the way as much. But this is what happens when you actually begin to bring the president's policies to bear. So they went through in this speech how much money is coming into Pennsylvania, how much overall is coming in, 4,000 new jobs, a 25% increase. And then if you look down here without, having to look at all of the details, each one of these is some major defense industrial base investment in the state of Pennsylvania, with the amount of money coming in some cases, the number of jobs connected to it, what the products are that are actually being built in the state. And obviously, Pennsylvania is not the only state. There's other states like Texas and North Carolina and Arizona that are major, major recipients of this. But I wanted to focus on this because, look, the question really is, and we will address election integrity, and I know everybody is sitting on the edge of their seat waiting to see what the president says tonight. I'm not going to predict it. For God's sake, it's Donald Trump. If you think you can predict what he's going to talk about tonight, you haven't been paying attention for the past, 10 years. Obviously, he's going to address election integrity in some respect, and I suspect make some moves to begin to shore up that side of it. But I will keep coming back to the point that I have made all the way through. We had crappy election integrity in 2024. Again, I'm in Michigan. I'm in Wayne County. Don't try and school me on how they steal elections. Been there, done that, seen it. Donald Trump still won in 2024. And and here's what I want to say. Whatever happens on election integrity, good, bad, or indifferent, there is still a pathway to win this midterm election if we focus on what this administration is doing to rip the United States economy out of the grip of a parasitical globalist elite, which has shrunk our industrial base, it shrunk our middle class and our working class, and honestly, it shrunk the way people think about themselves, which is why you have the ability of our enemies to play on the victimization, on the littleness, on the fear, on the reactiveness of the American population. Because if people are in that frame of mind, we will lose the midterms. But if people are on the offensive, saying exactly what the president reflected there, manufacturing, economic sovereignty, good paying jobs, producers, the basic American identity, which has characterized us throughout the best parts of our history, people will march into the polls and they'll figure out what to do properly. So I think we have to continually remember what this fight is about. Election integrity is a critical battle. The wars are aspects of this, but what's the fight? The fight is to reassert the American system of political economy and to create the condition and to destroy the British imperial system, what many people call globalization, and also give the rest of the world the ability, the opportunity, if they want to take it, to implement the American system. That's what we're fighting for. And everything else has to be seen in that context. So I wanted to be a contrarian, given the fact that 0% of the people responded on the economy, and just sort of relocate why you can't forget about that.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you to everyone tuning in to the show right now. Our friends on YouTube, please drop us a like if you haven't yet already. Thank you, everyone tuning on x.com. Give us a quick share. We have a bunch of super chats already. We have the outcome of our quick poll here. Let me just see if it's still the same. Yeah, okay. So this is the outcome. Everyone seems to be pretty much dialed in on election integrity. I think everyone's getting a little bit of the Iran issue is like on the news cycle so much. I think people are getting fatigued by it a little bit. So that makes sense. But I was surprised no one said inflation or economics. That was very shocking to me. Okay, so let me get to some super chats here because we already have some very excellent questions coming in. So Big Chungus, thank you for joining. Thank you for joining us, brother. JD started to slightly touch on the American system on Rogan yesterday. You folks will do a much more thorough job. We are waiting patiently. Barbara, Susan, your thoughts? Did you guys see the Rogan thing? I didn't even see it.
I just saw clips from it. I thought it was very interesting. First of all, people should understand. I see a lot of stuff in the chat about JD versus Rubio and everything else. That's war. Okay. Basically, JD, if you look at who's being attacked more than anybody else, other than Donald Trump, it's JD Vance. You really don't see Marco getting attacked very much. In fact, you see a lot of love for Marco, and JD is really taking the hits. And the reason why he's taking the hits is because both he and Marco are pretty inseparable in terms of the American system of economics and their idea that Catholic social doctrine, not necessarily the present Pope, but, going back in terms of Pope Leo, the first Pope Leo, essentially has been that something that came to the American system of economics. In other words, neither capitalism or communism was in those Catholic doctrines because both of them were considered to be just pure materialism in different forms. And the ideas of those encyclicals are very similar to what Hamilton wrote, and particularly what Kerry wrote as Lincoln's advisor about the labor and the human mind being the center of any economy. So, basically, I don't know that Joe Rogan is essentially the place to give a seminar on that, and I don't think JD wanted to basically, get into it that way. What he was talking about was, why is socialism attractive to our young people? Why do they fall into the DSA or wanting to be socialists? Why do they believe all this stuff? And it's the absence of a real campaign to bring them into this economic revolution and show them that, your creative instincts can be fulfilled by a grand mission on behalf of your nation. And that was the center of what he was really wanting to address yesterday on Rogan is why is this attractive to people? And I thought that was kind of bold because basically, you see people do talking points, which they have written out for him. He tends to just, engage in open dialogue, which is somewhat intellectually risky if you're a politician who are supposed to keep to your talking points. So I think that's a plus on his side of the equation.
Yeah, I mean, I want to pick up on what Barbara said, referencing back to the Pope Leo XIII, which is way back at the end of the 19th century. He wrote an encyclical called Rerum Novarum, where he attacked, as she said, he attacked both communism and capitalism as materialistic. And I want people to stop and think about that, because the whole description of our economic system as capitalist came in the middle or the later part of the 19th century. Our founding fathers, Abraham Lincoln, Henry Carey, John Quincy Adams, Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, they never described our system as capitalist, because capitalist implies, and I know there are people who use capitalism in a kind of industrial capitalism way, but if you actually look at this thing historically, the way Marx talked about capitalism, it is totally in this materialistic kind of way. Who controls the flows of money? And when you start trying to debate economics from the standpoint of who controls the flows of money, you can certainly see why young people are, quote, rejecting capitalism and falling into the seductive clutches of socialism. But what Pope Leo XIII addressed, and more importantly, what Henry Carey, Alexander Hamilton, and J.D. Vance are addressing, and Vance is doing it more expansively because it's kind of his portfolio, as vice president, and he's just written this book. It's not so much Marco Rubio's portfolio, but I think he's completely in sync with this, is the idea that why be a Christian? Why believe in spiritual values for your society, and then say that economics has nothing to do with that? That the only thing economics has to do with is material greed or personal advancement, right? What JD is saying, and maybe we should play the next clip from JD in terms of precisely this question, is economics can't be divorced from the values of your society. And the values of your society can't just be, I want to make a ton of money. Because guess what? You can't take it with you. I mean, I know that's pretty damn trite, but it is the case. So, Adam, why don't you play that other J.D. Vance clip?
Yes, hold on a moment here. Let me pull this here, and I will add this.
About in the book is like there is a Christian idea of political economy that's actually been lost in American politics, where it's like we think of it as libertarianism, the hardcore free market, versus socialism or communism. And there actually is a third way that has existed in pretty much all Christian economic thinking going back 2,000 years ago, which is that, yeah, extreme wealth inequality does create problems, but you still got to have private property. You still have to have a state that protects private property rights. And there's a way to balance these things that I think we've sort of lost in our country a little bit. And when I like, okay, let me play devil's advocate with the DSA, because I think that their ideas are crazy. And I think that you're right. They will lead to a very totalitarian place. I'm not defending a single thing that they say, particularly their hatred of ice cream. What I am saying is, and maybe this is just sort of the way my mind works, I tend to be a little bit more empathetic. Why are young people attracted to socialism in 21st century America? One of the best interviews that Charlie Kirk ever gave, it was right before he died. It was an episode that he did with Tucker Carlson, where he talked about the fact that if you don't give young people a stake, if you don't give them ownership, if you don't give them a sense of the American dream and of possibility in the future, they're going to become socialists. Like if you have a zero-sum environment for a 25-year-old in this country, they're going to start to say the only way for me to get anything is to take away from somebody else. So we have to get away from like the zero-sum thinking. I think that's like the root cause of this. But I also think that, look, we've ran an experiment in the United States of America. And, I think that we have undone that experiment, taken it a different direction in the Trump administration, where ship all the factories overseas and let low-wage foreigners make our stuff. That was a bad deal for American workers. again, it takes a long time to reverse that trend, but I think it's one of the best parts of Trump administration policy is you do see that trend starting to reverse. This idea that nobody should own anything, we should all become renters, whereas what we're trying to do is lower interest rates. You actually have seen housing costs stabilize in the country over the last year and a half, frankly, because of immigration. We had way too many people going after way too many homes. You close the border. This is one of the reasons why rents and housing costs have stabilized a little bit. So I think that unless you go down that pathway of allowing young Americans to own something, socialism is the inevitable outcome. Do I think that's good? No. But I really do worry, and I see this, frankly, more in my own party than I do on the other side. There is this revulsion to socialism that's totally justified without enough thinking about how did we get here in the first place.
Right.
And if we don't fix that, and I would say if we don't get back to a more Christian sort of understanding of economics, socialism is the alternative. Like that is where this goes.
Well,
if people don't
think
own
the game
anything,
is rigged.
exactly.
That's exactly the point. And if people have been paying attention, that is what this administration has been saying from the get-go. You know, Scott Bessent has given speeches. The system is rigged against the lower 50%. We're trying to change the system so that it actually does give young people, others in the lower 50%, the ability to actually fulfill the American dream. I think that clip of JD with Joe Rogan is extremely important, and I think people should spread it widely. And for all the people who are, people who I don't hold animus against, like Larry Kudlow, who are attacking JD Vance because he is adopting this economic approach and rejecting libertarianism and Milton Friedman and so on. They better take a deep breath and listen very hard to what he just said, because I think he is spot on in terms of the challenge that we have. And it's a challenge we'd better take up going into the midterms, because Donald Trump won in 2024 because of blue-collar workers, because he moved a large cohort of younger Americans, especially young men, both white and black, I might add. And if they're being subjected to the kind of psy-war, some of which I see in our chat, which is not surprising, whether it's people who are consciously pushing it or they're just falling prey to it, around the fact that it is the third way. It is the American system. And that's what this administration is magnificently bringing back to life, which is the solution to all of this.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. Plenty more super chats to say thank you, and so many more questions. We're going to get into them. I'm going to weave them into the super chats here in just a moment. So Deborah says, good morning, Adam, Barbara, and Susan from Connecticut. Thank you for all you are doing. Ordered the new flyers. Can't wait to start parking lot drops again. So I think Barbara and Susan can say something about parking lot bombs. Looking forward to the president's address tonight. God bless America. Barbara, Susan, should people be doing parking lot bombs in malls and stuff?
I really like talking to people when I'm handing out literature. I think that's really a better approach. And you tend to, end up getting a lot of people pissed off who are on the other side going nuts and stuff, which is, I guess, kind of fun. But not really all that effective in terms of what we're trying to do here, which is we're trying to show people what the president is doing, and we're trying to get the reactions to what the president is actually doing so we can figure out the next step we need to take with people to either get them on board or move the policy forward so that we can actually win. So not to critique getting the flyers out, but I really do think it's really important to talk when you're actually doing it to the people who are taking them.
Since Deb mentioned our new flyer, Adam, can we go to that slide that I've got? This is our new flyer. And again, let me clarify for people. Promethean Action, which is hosting this show, is our policy arm, but it can't get directly involved in elections. Which is why we have a federal PAC Promethean PAC, which is constituted to directly intervene into the elections, and in particular, the midterms. So what we've been doing this year is we've been providing people with half-page flyers that allow you to message the message that we're talking about, that this is an economic revolution, the American system is coming back, and this administration is absolutely committed to it. So this is side one of our current flyer, and here's side two, which goes through some of the really stunning developments that have already taken place in terms of what this administration is doing. That first column is what I call the firsts. That is, we're doing things for the first time in a generation or generations in the United States. That's how generational this is. We're outproducing Japan in steel production for the first time since 1999. We're creating new facilities for the first time in 50 years, an aluminum smelter in Oklahoma, reshoring a U.S. excavator factory in North Carolina, a graphene mine in New York in 70 years. That's 2 generations, or 3, depending on how you count. This is what's actually going on in the United States. And your neighbors don't know it. You're not supposed to know about this. In fact, in version 2 of this flyer, I changed that headline to the economic revolution that they don't want you to know about. Because this is where you get people's minds into the future so that they can actually function. So people can go to our Promethean PAC website. Adam, if you want to pull that up on your screen there we go. You'll see this new flyer right on the home page, and you can order 100 copies, 250 copies, however many copies that you can get out, and start organizing with it, because it is a good conversation starter from the standpoint of, did you know any of this was happening? And I guarantee you, unless it's somebody following Promethean PAC and Promethean Action, or somebody who does what I always tell people to do, go to the White House website and follow what they're actually doing. Unless they're doing one of those 2 things, they don't know about any of this.
Thank you, Susan. So just to circle back on that, this is the latest half-page flyer. I don't have a copy. It's about half the size of a printed page. If you go to Promethean PAC, that website's right there. You can find it. It's right on our front page. We have a link to it. So this is the latest version. It's now available on PrometheanPAC.com. Okay.
Someone
thank
asked,
you.
can we post the flyer to our X pages or other social media? Yeah. Yeah,
please. But by buying physical copies, you obviously help support Promethean PAC quite a bit. So we'd still appreciate, yes. So people can go and post it. Put a link to if you post it, please just put a link to Promethean PAC. That'd be helpful. So yes, please, you guys can go and share it. And thank you to, and let me just pull it up again. And thank you to Deba Dora. Thank you very much for your support. Mother of Pearl says, huge thank you for all you do. The history you are teaching people is a game changer. Any chance we can get a Promethean Action bumper sticker? Would love to advertise anywhere I drive. Okay, so yes, I do have a bumper sticker planned. The problem is the merch company that I use to like make the t-shirts and stuff, they don't offer a bumper sticker just yet. I think they do. I have to go and look at it again, but it is on my list of things to do. So thank you very much, Mother of Pearl. I hope you're subscribed to our free newsletter. Okay, let's take Kevin sent in 2 questions here about the specifics, the international specifics about what's going in Iran. I think this is still very relevant. So let's switch to an international angle here. And Kevin's asking about Iran. The Egyptian military should help Saudi Arabia defeat Houthis in Yemen to keep the Red Sea open to shipping, maintain the Suez Canal toll revenue. So yes, if people don't know, there has been discussion now that the Houthis are now rapidly planning to potentially disrupt the Red Sea Strait. I forget what it's called. It has a different name. Okay. Any thoughts on this, Barbara? And then Barbara or Susan, and then he brings up something else here. I'll just take both these together. With the alliance of Kurdish, Balak, and immortal guard rebels with the oppressed Arkesh Iran National Army, will they be able to defeat the IRGC Islamic Jihadist terrorists with their U.S. and air alliance support? When? So I think he's asking when is a collection of all these different groups going to finally defeat the IRGC? So Barbara or Susan, your thoughts on that, and potentially the issue of what's going on in Yemen with the Houthis and the potential of shutting down the Red Sea opening?
Well, the first thing in terms of shutting down the Red Sea has been being talked about ever since this conflict started, and it hasn't happened yet. And the Saudis, basically are very capable of taking care of that in terms of and are already acting on that. And what you're seeing, which is not really being discussed, but what's going on now behind the scenes, is that all of the Gulf countries, and I would have to believe also Egypt and Jordan, are beginning to sort of become a mass army, if you will, against the IRGC, and they're actually actively using their own military to assist in bombing Iran. Israel is not really doing anything at this point. It's the Gulf countries, the U.S. military, and I strongly suspect with help from Egypt and Jordan and the other countries. What people have to keep in mind is this is a very broad reshaping of the entire Middle East, which is taking place at this point. The situation in Lebanon is stabilizing, and basically Trump has told the Israelis that that you need to get out of both Lebanon and Syria. That's very much under negotiation in terms of ensuring that Israel's security can be protected in that arrangement. But nonetheless, that's what's going on there. Pipelines are being built as an alternative to all of these sea routes very, very quickly by all of the Gulf states to essentially create another means to get the oil and gas out of the area rather than have it subject to these obvious choke points. One thing which Trump said in his interview with Trey Yangst was very revealing, because he said, we're not going to be doing ground troops if it comes to that. Others are going to be doing that. And I suspect that that's exactly what Kevin here is referring to and talking about, because I strongly suspect that that is the option which will be used if indeed we don't get a surrender on terms which are acceptable within very short order. So I think that's kind of how you could analyze the situation at this point. And a lot we just don't know, all right? There's so much propaganda out there, and there's so much war going on around all of this, because you have to constantly remind yourself, step up, what is going on here? You have a mobilization of the country by the Democrats, by the intelligence, the rogue elements of our intelligence community, to say we need to use this war to finally defeat Donald Trump. That's their game plan. All right. And so you're getting all sorts of crap about what's actually going on. It's a quagmire. Trump should just shut up, according to David Ignatius in the Washington Post yesterday, because his bragging and all this other stuff is outside diplomacy and the way wars are supposed to happen. War is very, very thick. It's called the fog of war. But I think that's as much as I could say at this point about what I think the dynamics actually are.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is the thing that Kevin didn't mention, I'm sure he's totally aware of it though, is the degree to which Scott Bessent and the Treasury are one of our major assets in terms of reshaping this. Because cutting off the financial flows into the IRGC in particular is one of the critical elements in terms of shifting the balance of power. Because it's clear, as Barbara said, this president and J.D. Vance do not want to send ground troops into Iran. If it demands something like that, it's going to come from other countries. But that weakening the IRGC as much as possible by choking off the financial flows, the dirty money flows, the crypto flows, the legitimate flows. You know, how many times has the Treasury Department sanctioned various entities, and when you pull the strings on those entities, you find they go right back to the City of London, or they go to some offshore Cayman Islands, you know, company, and so on. So this is a very big part of the entire operation, which has never been used before, because the dirty money flows, the offshore banking, the huge speculative money, the drug money laundering, that is part of the business model of the British Empire. So of course they never used it, because it's how they think, it's how they run the world. So the fact that this administration is very quietly in the background. You know, Besant gave an interview a couple months ago where my ears went up, and I've been following it ever since. He said, almost 50% of my job is national security. And that was before this war, this military operation. I bet it's more than 50% now. So that's a critical part of the whole thing that you're not going to see. But weakening the IRGC in that way creates a different kind of geometry for beginning to shift the situation inside the country.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you, Kevin, for joining us this
Before
Thursday.
you get to the next one, I want to respond to someone way back in the chat, because I want to invite them. It's 80s Aaron 1, responding to the fact that you won't know about what Trump is doing economically unless you go to the White House or you follow us. Aaron, 80s Aaron 1 says, to be fair, I do a whole segment on my live stream about all these economic projects. So thank you for that. And we would like to collaborate. So please reach out through the contact us on Promethean Action so that we can share resources and see what you're getting out there, and maybe help, you know, take some of the load off us as we try and integrate this picture. Thank you.
I swear we have one of the best audiences on social media. Thank you, everyone, for your continued support. And again, thank you, Kevin, for joining us every week. Love having you here and sending in questions. Kev, thank you very much for the super sticker. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel here. And here we're going to thank you, Elaine. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing your name. I'm really bad with names. I'm sorry. Is it Eliani? Eliani. I think. And I'm gonna, and trust me, I'm gonna read some questions here. People want to know more about this. I think we all need a mental health check this week. Hard to hear the news about Lindsey Graham when the Save America Act was on deck. And you know what? Let me just say a quick aside here on the Save America Act, because I was looking at this one a little bit too. I didn't bring this up in the intro. The House now supposedly is committed to attaching the Save America Act onto every bill that goes through the House. So I'd like to see that there is still some momentum in our legislature, even though the Senate is going to be very problematic. Looks sus, even though his dad had a similar issue. The timing is suspicious. Okay, so I'm now going to bring in some questions from this is from our email newsletter subscribers. I'm still here, everyone. Okay, so this first person says, was Lindsey Graham's death, was Lindsey Graham a white hat or not? Was he taken out earlier, and his death just announced this week? Thank you, RCA99. Tammy says, Lindsey's sister Darlene is taking Lindsey's desk. Does she have all the power of a senator has, and will she be able to vote? Will Trump's eliminate Lloyd's of London's hold on the Strait? When Trump says he's left instructions to blow the hell out of Iran if he's assassinated, does he also mean the City of London? Can Trump get rid of the senators in Georgia? I am seeing that he can, and there was fraud in the elections and winning. Thank you, Tammy, for sending in your question. And Susan says, what's your take on Graham's death being an assassination to get the U.S. to retaliate with a full-out declaration of war? And I'd like to come back to the original question here. All need a mental health check. Barbara and Susan, what are your thoughts on all these things surrounding Lindsey Graham's death? Because yes, the optics of it look very suspicious. Barbara and Susan.
Well, you know, just on a personal note, okay, I know a whole lot about aortic dissections, okay, and it is very, very difficult. I mean, I have a family on my husband's side who have experienced these things. And so it's very difficult for me to believe that somehow there's a way that you can create that. I don't think so. I think sometimes things are exactly what they seem to be. That I think is also true in terms of Charlie Kirk's assassination. Sometimes things are exactly what they seem to be. And I think he had an aortic dissection. And if you know anything about it, that's kind of instantaneous. You don't know what's happening until it happens. You know, there's no way to pre-diagnose it. And I also don't think, from what I understand about the physics and biology of the thing, that you can actually create it. If you're prone to it or going to have it, it's a bad idea to fly. And that tends to be a complicating factor in terms of the thing. But they're doing all the tests, they're doing all the toxicology, and we'll see if he was poisoned or not. There's lots of ways to test for that scientifically. There isn't some mystery potion that you can disguise in terms of this type of toxicology testing, which is going to be done with him. So the answer I have temporarily, I'm always subject to revision with facts. But the people who immediately jumped on the internet and said, like, you know, Larry Johnson, for example, oh, he was killed in Kiev because he actually, you know, visited this factory and the Russians took him out. And the only reason you're not hearing about it is because then we'd be in a nuclear war with Russia. Okay. That to me is just the height of you know, clickbait. You know, and you know, essentially a way to present a world in which there's no reality that you actually have to grasp. We just construct things out of, you know, limited knowledge of facts, and you present this construction as your analysis of the situation. I don't agree with that methodology, obviously, at all. I'm not out to do clickbait. I'm out to actually try and figure out what the truth is to the best I can using an actual scientific method, not Dr. Fauci's methods of science, which are fraudulent, but the actual method, you know, set out by Plato and others who really spent lifetimes teaching you how to think about these situations. So, you know, that's my provisional answer on this thing. Yes, his sister, who he raised, can vote. She's a full-scale senator. She was sworn in, and she knows all about his positions on everything. They were very, very, very close. He raised her. So, you know, I don't think there's a diminishment there, which is important. I, you know, obviously abhorred his foreign policy positions, as did the president, by the way, just so people can think about this a little bit more clearly. He said, Lindsay and I disagreed fundamentally about foreign policy. He wants the Russia-Ukraine war to continue. I want to stop it. He wants, you know, basically Israel to continue the fight with Iran in the Middle East. I'm looking for peace. It's just very fundamental that his foreign policy was essentially screwed up. That said, he seems to have been quite the master politician in terms of the Senate, and a very, very important voice. People keep playing, which I thought was spectacular. I was quite shocked when it happened on, you know, the Supreme Court nomination and his intervention in that awful, awful, awful made-up hearing. And the only person who actually changed the trajectory there was Lindsey Graham, in a very furious defense of actual, you know, legal thinking and constitutional thinking in terms of how the Senate is supposed to operate regarding advice and consent, as opposed to the dirty, 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 nasty, awful things which the Democrats did in that instance. So, you know, in the retrospective, I have a new respect for his voice in the Senate which I think was very important. He was kind of like a Tip O'Neill type of politician. And he brought home, the reason why he kept getting elected is not really because of all the donations he got from defense contractors or AIPAC, etc. He really brought home the bacon for South Carolina. He really did have a masterful constituent service where if something went wrong in your life, people in South Carolina knew I can call Senator Graham and he'll help me. So I think, that's kind of the retrospective that I take on all of this stuff. And I don't think that he was killed in Ukraine by the Russians, or that, he was killed by the Israelis, or he was killed by any number of people who, have put in their prejudices as to who they think are the ultimate villains in the world, or even that he was killed by the British. I think he had an aortic dissection. And if you actually look at what that involves, I think you'll actually think through things a little bit differently.
Yeah, let me address the mental health check side of this from a broader standpoint, because I personally just find it very odd that people think that even if you're dealing with an intelligence operation, that you can get to the bottom of it on the internet. I just think it's odd. And I'm going to do it from a certain personal perspective. Now, admittedly, I'm going to be referring to a time when there wasn't the internet. But in 1968, I was campaigning for Bobby Kennedy Sr. in California when he was shot. And it was a very traumatic experience. I was 19. All right, now you can do the math. I like to say I was 2 when I was campaigning for him, but I wasn't. It was traumatic. And I didn't believe that Sirhan Sirhan was the mastermind behind it, whether he pulled the trigger or not. Just like even at that age and younger, I didn't believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was the only person involved, or whether he even was the shooter in terms of JFK. And if honestly, if I hadn't run into the Lyndon LaRouche organization in 1971, which I did, which, Barbara and I spent 50 years of our life in. And at this point, we always say we have nothing to do with the organization now headed by Helga Zepp LaRouche. We are Promethean Action, stand on our own feet. But if I hadn't gone through, if I hadn't found somebody who gave me the ability to think through the bigger question, which is why, and what are the forces behind some of these horrific events, if, especially assassinations. And I'm with Barbara at the moment. I think a cigar is just a cigar in terms of Lindsey Graham, but, we'll have to wait and see. But if I hadn't been given a methodology to open up the aperture of my mind beyond who did this and can I prove it? Well, guess what? We still don't, we still don't have the whole picture on the assassination of RFK Sr. or JFK, as far as I'm concerned. But if I had spent all those decades, over 50 years of my life, just trying to figure out that, number one, I'd be pretty miserable. And number two, I don't think I'd have much effect on the world. So the question to me is not the particulars in each one of these cases, which you cannot deduce from the damn internet or social media. If it's an intelligence operation, it's an intelligence operation, which means it's buried. And you have to be in the government with the power to root it out, with somebody like a Tulsi Gabbard, for example. So what should your role be? Where do you put your passion and your activity? Well, how about in defeating the system that spawned these assassinations and these other actions? And honestly, as far as I'm concerned, Robert Kennedy Sr. got justice the day his son stood in the Oval Office and was sworn in as Secretary of Health and Human Services under Donald Trump. To me, that's at least a giant step toward justice. There's more to be had, But to my thinking, it has to be done in this policy domain, which is why I spent very little time trying to untangle all of these charges. Because number one, there's nothing I can do about it. And number two, I just don't see where it gets you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Barbara. I just want to add something. I think, excuse me, especially the modern internet in the past, like maybe 5 to 10 years, people have an obsession with this idea of open source intelligence. That's a common term used on X.com and on the internet. And everyone's looking at these open source intelligence clips that are coming from God knows who. And they're trying to deduce, some different timeline from, it's absolutely crazy. Thank you very much for sending in your question, friend. Thank you to our newsletter subscribers. If people didn't know, we have a free newsletter. That's where the questions that I'm showing on the slides are coming from. We have both a weekly and a daily option to get our emails. The link to subscribe to our email newsletter is in the subscription. If you'd like to give us a $10 a month sustaining contribution, again, sign up for the email newsletter. You'll be presented with a free option or a $10 a month option, and you can select the daily or weekly newsletter or both. So thank you, everyone, for joining us so far. We have plenty more questions here I am going to get to next. So I'm going to take this one here from okay, Josh, thank you. Let's say America gets rid of London's influence and Democrats lose their platform. What's to stop the City of London and Democrats from infiltrating Republican or any other party with future schemes? Will they just give up?
No, I don't think so. I don't think they're going to give up. I think they have to be overwhelmingly defeated. And the only way that that's going to happen, I saw a comment in the chat, which I thought was really interesting, saying, I was friends of Charlie Kirk, and my answer to all of this is to double down on his dream. Basically, that's what we've got to do at this point. We have to double down on the fact that we are building an American system, a new American revolution, if you will, which will benefit all of us. And as the president likes to say, you have to think about, what will future generations say about what we did here for them? That's a mission orientation. That's what the City of London and the Democrats don't have. They are, if you reduce all of their philosophical musings down to the essence of it, it's really an economy which is incapable of growing or providing for people. The World Economic Forum, what was the proposal? Let's go back to feudalism. It's much easier. We can control things that way. What's going on in Europe at this point? We're going to control people by, controlling their thoughts and speech and essentially, putting their minds in the sewer every single day. So they're not going to give up. We have to defeat them. But the way we defeat them is not going to be like magical. Okay, the president, tonight declares martial law. That's not really going to happen. Okay. And that's part and parcel of what we're talking about with all of the stuff that's going on in the internet. What he's going to do is expose certain things to you out there. And then it becomes, what are you going to help us do about it? And the major next battle, which is coming up, is very clear. It's called the midterm elections. If the Democrats actually succeed on that battlefront coming up, all right, then the Trump agenda and everything we're talking about here in terms of building a future is going to be dead, very hard to implement for 2 years. That's a very big battle. And the British and everybody else, everything you see, we can break it down and it can become, very delineated for you. Here are the structures. These are the things that are important, etc. But if you don't actually join the battle at this point and say, I want this for my kids, and I want this to be my legacy, which is how Trump is actually talking about it, then, we're going to lose. and we can have all of the opinions, and we can argue about all of the fluff out there all we want. That's what the Psy-War is actually directed at. But understanding what we're building and using your mind to actually explain that to people is the central thing we got to focus on right now.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I mean, it's a very good question, and they've done it throughout American history. You know, they'll use up a political formation that they create, and then they'll move on to another one. I mean, at the end of the 19th century, from the period which included Lincoln, and someone mentioned, you never mentioned Garfield, he was assassinated and he was American system, so we should give him a certain amount of notice in there, up to McKinley. Clearly, the Republican Party was the instrument of the American system, and the British hated it, and they killed a bunch of presidents, and they weakened it as a result of that. And then you actually had this very odd period of time, I would say, between the assassination of McKinley in 1901 and Franklin Roosevelt coming into office in 1933, where Americans did not have an institution they could actually count on to defend them nationally. I mean, you may have had various state institutions where the principles of the American system and the Republican Party continued to be carried forward, or individuals, but nationally you didn't, which is why it was such a wretched period of time. We had a whole bunch of bad presidents during that period of time. Kind of like, I'd say maybe the period between Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump, as an example. And what happened? And I know there's, Franklin Roosevelt has been given, the British history treatment in terms of he was a communist, he was a this, he was a that. What he did, and Larry Kudlow, actually Newt Gingrich recently referenced this. I'm not saying Gingrich referenced it in a positive way or not. It really wasn't clear. He said Donald Trump is carrying out the biggest political realignment since Franklin Roosevelt. Because what did Roosevelt do? By reviving certain aspects of the American system, although not so much by name, and he had some bad policies in there too, but by trying to get back to a system which defended production and people, he drew into the Democratic Party blue-collar workers, minorities, farmers, all of whom had been previous Republicans, because the Republican Party had been completely contaminated and corrupted, as you say, Joss, that it was that kind of process. Well, the Democratic Party kind of carried the ball through Roosevelt in World War II, and perhaps would have picked the ball up again with John Kennedy, who was assassinated. But, the Democratic Party became corrupted. And then Reagan might have picked up the ball, but of course he was almost assassinated 3 months into his administration. And the Bush part of his administration became increasingly dominant. So although he did certain historic things for which he should be honored, his administration was a hybrid. It was a mixed bag. And then everything went to shit, right? With Bush, with Clinton, with Obama, with Bush, got them out of order, and so on. It was, again, another one of those uniparty kind of situations where both parties had been discredited. And of course, Donald Trump has now largely hijacked the Republican Party. The old British system neocon faction is clearly still there, but they don't control it. And they would like to try and get it back. We are intent on ensuring that it doesn't happen. But the answer to your question from the standpoint of that historical sweep is, if you're clear on your principles, if you actually understand what is the difference between the American system based on production, based on human creativity, versus the British system, which is based on money and power and treating people like animals, if you're clear on those principles, you are going to be protected from these kind of operations where they take over this institution. They use they change their clothes. They change their outer clothing throughout history. If you're clear on what's on the inside, they're just not going to get away with it.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. And I want to just a little bit of nerd history here. I want to say something about James Garfield for just a second, because I don't think we actually talk about him enough. Let me get my StreamYard in order here. So if people didn't know this, James Garfield came up with a non-trivial and unique proof of the Pythagorean theorem. And he's this guy was assassinated. He supposedly was working on this proof as he was a congressman from Ohio. He would regularly work on his proof when he was serving in Congress. And I believe he actually discussed it on the floor of Congress too. So this James Garfield, I mean, he was never really able to do much. Unfortunately, he was assassinated, but this is the true American spirit here that we kind of have to bring back to the United States and all of our citizens. So I just wanted to say that quick aside about Garfield. And so thank you very much, Josh, for your question. I hope we answered it. I'm going to take another question that kind of stands on the shoulders of this one back to our email list from a new supporter who's kind of maybe thinking about similar things. I'm new to your show and so glad I found you. After voting for Trump twice, I had almost given up on him until I heard your show. So many things about Trump's administration started to make sense when I began listening to your analysis. Unfortunately, I find when I try to share this information, I find many people willing to say something like, Trump is corrupt. He has enriched himself and his family with billions of dollars since he's been in office. Is that true or even relevant? And where would I find accurate information to share with them about these types of questions? Thank you. And thank you, Cindy, for sending us your honest question. Barbara and Susan, your thoughts on this one?
Well, this is a Democratic talking point, which is going to be used in the midterms. And the answer to it is pretty simple. His stocks, which is the accusation, are in a blind trust, meaning he doesn't have anything to do with how things are invested. They're trying to say, well, Jared, invests in these things, or Eric invests in these things. And he says, what my family does, it is up to them. Okay. They're out to do, and make money for their firm. All right. I'm not involved in it. I don't take a salary. And basically what they're trying to say is everybody associated with Trump and the family has to be a pauper for the next 4 years, or else we're going to come after them just like we came after them before. And, just so we're clear, if you actually look at what was done in these prosecutions, these kids were, essentially mauled by the Democrats because the whole idea was if we make it painful enough for his children, the president will actually cry uncle, which is a typical terrorist operation, which is what these operations are. I don't call them dirty tricks. I call them political terrorism, because that's what they actually are. They're designed to destroy any incentive for anybody trying to make change and coming into public office at this point. So I think the facts are pretty clear. And if they had anything, they wouldn't be running around, they say, well, now he controls the Justice Department. So, basically, how can he be prosecuted or what have you? Well, he doesn't control all of the attorney generals in New York and everything else. And if they really had something outstanding, they wouldn't be using it as oppo. I mean, that's basically what is going on here. So I think the way to counter it, however, is not necessarily by saying what I just said. Okay. You have to take whoever you're talking to who's just been given a whole slew of, information to upset your vision of the president. The stock market has risen. So his 401k and other investments in that blind trust, you have to believe are doing just fine. I don't think he took the blind trust and put somebody completely incompetent in charge of it. All right. But the answer is let's get away from that and let's talk about what the real issue is. What is he doing? And who is he aiming his profits at? He's aiming everything at raising the middle and working classes of the United States up. That's what this is about. It's about creating productive jobs. It's about creating productive workers. All right. And everything which, and he's also into organizing some of the most rapacious capitalists on Wall Street and in big tech behind this program. And you've got all sorts of prosperity and productivity breaking out in the economy. Electrical engineers, for example, working on data centers are making $250,000 a year, kind of an astounding figure. Same is true of anybody who's in the trades. They're profiting massively off of this economic buildup. So, the people who are using this attack are billionaires. That's who runs the Oppo. They're entrenched Wall Street interests who see this entire program. Think about it. Complete reformation of the Federal Reserve, actual focus on real productive jobs, forcing people to come back from overseas to put their industry and manufacturing here. Big, big change, which takes time, as J.D. Vance just said. But it's the basis for actually having a future. So is it relevant? That's the question that was asked. The ultimate answer to that is no. It's not. It's Oppo. It's designed to make you think anybody who's out to secure the future, has their money out and there's nobody I can actually trust. That's what it's designed to actually set up in your mind as a frame. It's psychological warfare. And the way to approach people is with our flyers. Do you know what Donald Trump is actually doing? Do you know what he actually says our security policy is? Do you know what is actually going on here? You're misinformed. You're focusing on something which, I'm not going to sit down and prove to you that it's all BS, because you're probably pretty convinced of that. But I want you to actually take a look at what he's actually doing and then think about the people who are upset about that. That's who's doing the actual Oppo in this vein. So that's what I actually put forward there.
Yeah, I'd add one other little angle on it, but I think in general, what Barbara said is true in terms of, look at the expansion of blue-collar jobs. This administration has pointed out, even in his first administration, and it's continuing, blue-collar wages increased faster than supervisory level wages. You're seeing an actual restructuring of the U.S. economy to benefit the middle class, or I prefer to call it the working class, or what Besant says is the lower 50%. And in fact, our second flyer, let me see if I have that in there. Hold on a second. Let me find it before we share the screen. There we go. Share the screen. There we go. Our second flyer has this, what I think is a really useful quote from Scott Bessent. It's hard for you to read. It's this one right here, but I'm going to read it. He said, the Democrats have this strategy called compensate the loser. I think that the bottom 50% of America, Bessent says, I don't think that the bottom 50% of Americans are losers. The system hasn't worked for them. They're winners. It's just a bad system. So we are going to fix the system. And the bad system is the system of free trade and outsourcing, which destroyed the middle and the working class. So I think Barbara's right, from the standpoint of you've got to refocus the discussion to this layer of the American population where there's a real world. You can wave your hands like Kamala Harris or Barack Obama or the rest of these people, in terms of being for whatever they claim they're for. I'm not even sure they claim anything. Mostly it's what they're against versus what this administration is actually committed to doing. But that being said, I would also just, suggest, see how this works. Maybe it won't. I'm sorry, Donald Trump was a billionaire before he became president. You know, he's been prosecuted, he's been shot, he's been attacked, he's been impeached. He doesn't need to be president to get more money. You know, so maybe he's doing it for another reason. That might work, it might not, depending on how far gone your friends are.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you, Cindy, for sending in your question. I know a lot of people bring this up about Donald Trump, about his family dealings, but all you have to do is just remember back to, I mean, compare the family dealings of Trump versus the family dealings of the Biden family, something like that. This is so terrible. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Let me just give a quick shout out for the show. We do a live show once every Thursday. We do 3 political updates a week. Our next political update is going to be Saturday. Please subscribe to the channel right now if you haven't yet already. Hit the notification bell. Let us stay in contact with you. If you've been subscribed for a while and you didn't know this, we have a free newsletter. The link is in the description. If you'd like to support us with a $10 a month sustaining contribution, again, the link to do that is in the description. Just sign up for our email newsletter. You'll be presented with an option to give $10 a month or completely free, up to you. So thank you, everyone. And I'm going to take this significant super chat here. Thank you, Susan, for joining us every week. Listen to 2 of your best information episodes this week. I listened twice. So grateful I found your channel. Thank you. Well, Susan, we love having you here. Thank you for supporting our work. Barbara or Susan, any thoughts on your 2 latest episodes on YouTube?
Well, you know, both of us try and actually situate what's going on with the population. We take a good look at all of the social media. We take a good look at the world's intelligence. We take a good look at all the open source information that's available. And we try and actually do that psychological check by saying, okay, here's the underlying dynamic, and here's what people are actually asking us to talk about. Sometimes, you know, by really, and we have a very rigorous definition of what we present. We only present stuff that we can back up and that has an actual aspect of truth based on history, based on the dynamics which actually govern, you know, how history actually changes. This is what makes Donald Trump so dynamic, is that he is really out to change everything. You know, he has decided that the system, which we just emphasized, didn't work. So he's gone, just like our forefathers did, back through all of history and said, well, what did work? The American system. What have we experienced? What's the difference in my case between what people are saying, we're in a forever war in Iran, it's a quagmire, you know, the president got trapped by Israel, all the stuff that's out there. And then you actually look at the dynamics of the situation and you give a comparison for people. All of these wars that actually happened, you know, after the fall of the Soviet Union were wars based on this whole idea that America is the policeman of the world. We have what's called a unipolar moment, which is what they actually said. And therefore, we have the hubris, which is, you know, one of the great sins, to go out and actually change the world and make democracy flourish throughout the world. All right. Trump has specifically rejected that. People ought to go to the White House website and read the national security strategy of the United States, because that's what the very first page talks about. We had this thing where the Soviet Union was no longer there and the whole way the world was ordered was becoming different. And rather than saying, let's develop our economy, let's actually figure out a way so that everybody benefits, we went to war as the world's policeman, which was insane. And all of these wars were based on delusions. But then it begs another question. Do you ever go to war? Are there just wars? How do you actually use the military as a force to get peace? And that's what's actually going on with his Iran strategy at this point, which people don't understand because they're still locked into all of those crazy wars, which had no purpose, which drained every revenue source we had, which killed thousands of people on both sides without any reason why it was being done, except we're enforcing democracy on the world, so-called. All right, that was the whole mantra which you heard. This is very different. There is a specific threat. A bunch of crazy people having a nuclear weapon. That's a pretty big threat. All right. And, essentially we're going to wipe out that threat. They've retaliated in the way that they've always been retaliating throughout this period by closing the Strait of Hormuz, which only requires, as J.D. Vance said, having the capacity to shoot a few missiles at ships, and everybody freaks out. So, and then on top of it, the key factor is you have the Democrats and the media saying, if this war is prolonged, why, we can defeat Trump. We can use the fact that people don't like it to actually beat Trump over the head and win the midterms. That is, in my view, treason, sedition of the worst kind of order, because you're actually campaigning in favor of the IRGC and against the United States for your political purpose, so-called. All right. So that's what I tried to put into all of that, a very short presentation as to the elements that are going on right now. And, sometimes people get freaked out. They don't like it because it challenges their assumptions, but that's okay because we have to get the truth out to people. And that's what we're sort of dedicated to.
Yeah. And again, on a mental health front, the show that I did on Monday focused on the New York Times reporters being subpoenaed because they leaked classified information about Air Force One when the president was leaving Ankara and Iran was declaring him the Great Satan and the hostilities had broken out again. It was kind of surprising. Well, again, it gets back to this question of Psy-War. I think people were not paying close attention to that because they were all falling into the Lindsey Graham rabbit hole. Why did he die? Where did he die? How did he die? What does it mean? And so on. This was pretty big. This is putting the life of the president of the United States in danger out there, right out in the open. So, I addressed that, but then I addressed it from the standpoint of what are they so afraid of? And took it back to what this fight is really all about, which is the British imperial system will do everything in its power, as long as it has any kind of power, to prevent the American system from taking root hold in the United States or in the rest of the world. So, I did that kind of deliberately. It didn't get the views that it usually gets. I think in part because people were just totally looking over here when this was actually happening over here.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you, Susan Hogan, for joining us every week. I'm sure you're getting a newsletter already. Thank you. I'm jumping around in the super chats here. I want to take this one on data centers and flock cameras because this is coming up. So thank you, Evie Funk. And I'm going to take this one here from number 8 from our email newsletters. So Evie says, data center Trump's post, people not happy. Very unpopular with both sides here in Georgia. Georgia Power using eminent domain, seizing land, increasing costs, sucking up all the power, water, environment, and noise. Can you all provide some clarity? And I'm going to pull this one, StreamYard. And I'm going to pull this one up here from, I'd like to read this person's name here, from Anne. Anne says, Americans do not want the data centers or flock cameras. Why does Trump not do anything to protect our freedom to move about the country without surveillance? This looks bad for him. And all these tech companies and other billionaires belong to the group that means to control our country and the world. People are losing hope in Trump. Well, not everyone. He needs to stand up and make this right and get rid of the surveillance data centers and tracking cameras, our every move, and don't let big tech control our country. Thank you, Anne, for your questions and concern. And thank you, Evie Funk. Barbara and Susan, your thoughts on this very popular issue at the moment?
Well, flock cameras, basically that will be litigated in court, I'm sure. That's what's going to happen. Because, to the extent that you have criminal cases based on the ability to see someone going somewhere to do something bad, most certainly the lawyers for that criminal are going to be raising that on Fourth Amendment grounds. And these are local decisions. The police power in our country, except for federal crimes, actually exists with the state. And that's something people don't take into account. They assume the president can just, do something on a national basis and overrule a state's decision in the area of criminal justice or something else. That's not so easy to do. We gave the states a whole lot of power for these particular situations. The same thing is true in terms of the architecture, I'll put it, of the data centers, how eminent domain functions, how your electric bills are charged. The regulatory aspect of that primarily rests with the states. Some states, I live in the data center capital of the world, Virginia. You can't go an inch here without seeing a data center. Something that used to be pure country, 5 years ago is now data center, data center, data center, data center. All right. But there's a couple of myths out there. One is they're not using a whole lot of water. Two, the way that Trump is talking about it, he wants them to actually be built from the standpoint of mass building with their own power sources, i.e. they've got to set up their own electrical plant to get the permitting for this on a large basis, not on a state basis, but on a federal basis for how they're built. Whether he can override what a state is deciding in terms of how they're going to do this around the enforcement of eminent domain and other things, that's, again, a legal question, which he's going to have to look pretty hard at. But his idea of doing this is to have the data centers actually build their own electrical inputs and take it off the grid, because he says if we do this on a national basis, the grid isn't even capable of handling it. That's the result of complete lack of infrastructure, which has gone on for years and years and years. So I understand that this is a big issue. I think the key issue, the most critical issue, which I think the president is fixated on, is how is this going to all impact jobs? What is the shift going to be in terms of jobs? Obviously, people who went to school and were told to learn to code as their future are probably going to be driven out of jobs in what was called by Obama the knowledge economy. All right. That was the whole paradigm which we had during the Obama administration. People were laid off in manufacturing. We killed everything, sent everything that was building something overseas to be built. And essentially what's now happening is all the people who were engaged in writing software or engaged in other, the knowledge economy, so-called, are being directly challenged by AI. Because AI can, in some respects, do that a little bit better in that particular area of the economy. So the question then becomes, what are the jobs of the future? And that's really depends on how we're envisioning the future economy. And I look at all of this stuff as basically a kind of a way of generating fear in the population so that they get blinded to the real problem, which is, how does this actually impact the workforce of the future? And what should my kid be doing now to assure that he makes a living? And that's the real challenge of the transition we're going through. It's a huge transition. People compare it to the Industrial Revolution. And those of us who are optimists also look at that and see that each of these major economic revolutions actually end up creating more jobs and more creativity if we actually navigate it the right way. So that's how I'd answer this relatively complex field between state power under the Constitution and federal power, and how these things are actually going on right now.
Yeah, let me address another aspect of this, because there's an implicit assumption. Well, it's explicit. I think in the other question that we had, data center equals surveillance state. Therefore, all data centers mean we're going to fascism. Well, honestly, to me, that's like saying, this is a gun. You can use it to shoot your wife. Therefore, all guns will be used to shoot your wife. It's just not the way that it works. Data centers are any technology can be used for good or ill. The question is, what is the direction of your country? What is the intention of your president? And the idea that because Donald Trump thinks that we need to have data centers so that we don't fall behind China, which is a very real issue, means that he supports a complete surveillance state right out of 1984. It's just a lazy argument. I mean, people really have to sort of take a beat and put themselves in the real world, because the essence of psychological warfare, again, is in this sort of one-dimensional world where this equals that. Therefore, if you're for this, you are that, and your hair catches on fire. Rather than, what is the world we're actually living in? We're living in a world where artificial intelligence is not going to be put back in the genie bottle. And, as this president and J.D. Vance and many other people have made very clear, imagine a world in which China is way ahead of us in artificial intelligence. Think of that in terms of our defense. Think of that in terms of cyber attacks on our economy. Think of that in terms of the more positive side, which is your ability to produce more, which you can if used properly. Artificial intelligence is used for advanced machine tooling. You still have a trained machine toolist who has to know how to use that. And by the way, those trained machine toolists make $250,000, right? Using AI to be more productive, to have greater dominion over nature. Now, is there a layer of the population of the people in that business who probably have a very different idea in terms of what to use AI for, in terms of the surveillance state? Of course there is. But, and someone in the chat said, well, why doesn't Trump express his concerns on this? He has, duh. You're not paying attention to what he's saying. You're paying attention to the explosion on the internet. He's made clear you can't have data centers if they're going to suck off local power. He's made clear there are dangers and challenges in terms of AI, which is why he's got whole sections of his administration working on this to make sure that there are the proper guardrails where it can actually be used in a way that benefits the country as opposed to not. Now, in terms of data centers, and again, these are local decisions. No, I don't think it makes any sense to put one in some suburban area's backyard. Like here in Michigan, we have lots of brownfield sites, old industrial sites, which probably cost a little bit to clean up, which is maybe why some of your AI companies don't want to do that. But, you could put through zoning kinds of things. You're going to build one of these things, you got to provide your own power, and you build it at least in a brownfield site, not in some suburban backyard or completely destroying the entire rural area of a country. So, but those discussions, to the extent that the federal government is involved in those discussions, they're taking place. To the extent that the state governments are in charge of that, well, you better pay attention to your midterm elections and make sure that you have serious people who are getting elected to your legislatures, your governor's offices, and so on, so that they can make serious decisions, not we're banning all data centers forever and ever, in which case we're all going to be speaking Chinese probably in a generation, but how do we actually manage this important new technology in a way that does not hurt your population, but still benefits the needs of the nation?
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. I have a few things to say on this because I am a computer native person. I think, first off, everyone says people don't want data centers. Well, people's habits don't really support that idea at all. The fact is that people are just spending more and more time on these devices.
There's your data center.
All of this, anything having to do connected to the internet means data center. And we're only increasing the amount of internet connected devices we have in the world. And that means we simply need more data centers. And I know I always talk about Boston Dynamics, but I want to bring up Boston Dynamics again, because again, first off, it's an American company. That's 100% American ingenuity, but also they have really cool tech demos, probably the best robotic tech overall in the world right now. I know there are other players doing different things, but let me just play this because all the data center infrastructure is also going to be supporting this, which is literally robotics is about to be hitting society like a huge wave. Let me just play this one here for the Spot robot. All right, and one more really short clip here.
Yeah, I mean, look at that first one. Isn't that better than some poor Amazon or UPS driver having to sweat their balls off? It was 117 degrees real feel here yesterday in Michigan, and there's poor people out there delivering crap to people's doors.
Yeah, you see the people just throwing boxes or Amazon packages across the thing. All right, so thank you, Evie. Thank you very much for sending
And Liberty Bell says, and I'm with her, it would be nice to have a robot that cleans windows and scrub floors. Amen.
Guys, that's coming soon. So right now the work is being done on the dexterity of the hands. I could pull up other tech demos. So you have these companies that like have done all the tendons, like the arm works like on a tendon system, like your fingers, and the dexterity of these things are wild. So yeah, this is all coming very soon, and it all has to be powered by data centers. It does. Okay. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I have so many more questions. I'm going to go to something that people wanted at the beginning, which is what is going on with the Save America Act, midterms, election security. So let me pull up some discussion about what Trump possibly is going to talk about tonight at 9 p.m. Because yes, there's been a bunch of leaks, but no one knows for sure. So the first one here is from Johan. Hi, everyone. Just wanted to ask if on Thursday night, President Trump's speech at 9 p.m. American time is about the 2020 election fraud and who's behind it. Would Promethean Action be able to do a shorter live on Friday? This is a really bad Friday, actually. Or another day so we can discuss his findings. Thanks, guys. Love you all. God bless. Thank you, Johan, for your question. And Kmart says, if the 2020 election is incontrovertibly revealed as fraudulent, what steps can be constitutionally or lawfully taken, if any, to remove these fraudulently elected congressional politicians from office outside of normal removal process? Can actions taken during the Biden administration actually be reversed? Thank you, as always, for your valuable insight. Thank you, Kmart, for joining us. ladies?
Well, it depends on what is going to be actually said tonight. That's where we start. What I suspect from all the leaks is we're going to be talking about Chinese and other foreign involvement in the mail-in ballot situation. And we're going to be talking about a cover-up by the intelligence community of things they knew about that, but didn't tell anybody about. I think we know a whole lot about the fraud committed in 2020. Time magazine did a whole piece proudly talking about what they did around the mail-in ballot situation and how it actually worked and what happened. The thing which I think will happen here is that to the extent that what's revealed is how many, illegal voters are on the voter rolls, it could and will lead, I hope, to the Save America Act being passed, which I think is the primary reason the president is doing this at this point. And I think and hope that it will facilitate getting rid of all the roadblocks which exist in all the various states to cleaning up the voter rolls, which is the essential thing we have to do in terms of securing the midterms. But again, as Susan and I keep, talking about like over and over and over again, we had 2024. It was the same group of people doing the same things with massive amounts of money, and yet we won. And the reason for that is a really simple concept. Voter fraud works on very small margins, all right? And if you overwhelm, think about, I'm sitting there, think about it from the standpoint of you yourself being a criminal mind at this point for a second. Step into the shoes of the person who's actually conducting the fraud. What I got to know what the vote is so I can come in with my slam dunk afterwards just to give me the margin of victory, but I can't do it on such a high level that I can get caught. All right. That's the fundamental issue which we're actually talking about here when you get into the mind of the fraudster. If you actually overwhelm them by a massive turnout of your voters, they can't do it. It doesn't mean that fraud didn't happen in 2024. It did. But you overcame that particular margin by a massive vote for the president. That's the ultimate ballot security. That's hard. All right. That's you have to really focus on that to get it done. You have to really fight for that to get it done. And what most people are looking for at this point is, I'd like to see just a really quick solution to the whole problem like that. This isn't going to happen that way, folks. And so, I think the president's strategy is that by revealing all of this, he builds the popular mandate where it becomes impossible for any of these dickheads in the Senate to actually say anymore, we're not gonna vote for the Save America Act because we don't have the votes from the Republicans and because we don't have the balls to actually get past the filibuster and everything else that's being thrown up against it. I think that by showing how foreign powers are actually determining American elections and showing it graphically, if that's what happens, it's going to change some minds here. And that's, I think, what the president is after tonight. I don't know. But, basically, that's kind of how I put it together.
Yeah, again, I want to underscore, we don't know. I also suspect he's going to talk about more than the 2020 election, given the fact that it's Donald Trump. But I want to cycle back to what Barbara said a few minutes ago. You constantly have to check yourself in terms of how much you are passionately wanting something because it's going to be a magic bullet that's going to solve your problems and you're not going to have to do all that much. I've seen it. It's all out there. He's going to nullify the Georgia elections from 2020, which means we have to get new senators. Well, I'm going to go on record right now. I seriously doubt that that's going to happen. I don't even know a pathway for it to happen. Because what does that do? People are saying, oh, thank God, we waved a magic wand and we took care of a lot of these problems. No, you're going to have to work your ass off between now and the midterms. I'm sorry. You have to cut through the Psy war that is having an effect on yourself, maybe, and on your fellow Americans, and get them constantly thinking about what is the nature of this fight. Let's not forget, we're only, a week and a half away from the 250th anniversary of the founding of the Declaration of Independence, which I think was very important. I think it did remind a lot of people of the larger questions of what this nation is, what we represent in the world, what our principles are. Not that they haven't been subverted, not that they haven't been beaten and battered and bruised over the years. But what is this fight really all about? And to keep yourself focused on your mission to constantly communicate that to your fellow citizens. So I don't know what he's going to do tonight. I don't know what's going to actually be actionable. I tend to agree with Barbara that the primary purpose of this is going to create such a firestorm that maybe we can finally push the SAVE Act over the finish line. I'd be surprised, and will there be some perhaps indictments involved? I don't know, but we know what the state of the courts are. So, you can indict all you want, but you've got federal judges who have been put in there by the other side who are going to knock this thing down and knock it down and knock it down. And maybe something will get, we've seen that even with Trump's attempt to use the Postal Service to say, oh, we don't want to deliver absentee ballots to places that aren't verified, which seems to be a very legitimate federal power. He's fighting that in the courts. So, people have to think about the real battlefield, and they have to think about where their role is on that battlefield. Think of yourself from the standpoint of World War II or the American Revolutionary War. And, unless you're sitting at George Washington's side, as a few youngsters like Alexander Hamilton and Lafayette were, your main job is not to sit there and second guess George Washington's strategy. Your main job is to go out and execute your responsibility in this fight. And I submit that your responsibility in this fight is to make sure that you each get at least 10 people head in the right place so that they go out and vote for the right people if you still have a primary in front of you, like we do here in Michigan, or more importantly, the general election, because the primaries are settled for most of the states right now, that they vote in the general election up and down the Republican ticket. And some of those Republicans are going to suck. We already know that. But, we're at a moment in history right now where Donald Trump has to keep the majority in the Senate and in the House. How it works out on your state level in terms of your legislatures, your governors, and so on, that's those are particular decisions for people in particular states. In our state, we've had a trifecta of crazy Democratic witches destroying our state. And if the Democrats come back in, Michigan is finished. It is just finished as an industrial power or a state where anybody's going to want to live. And I don't know what's going to happen in the primary for governor. It's a very complicated kind of situation here in terms of Republican. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not going to share my views on it in this venue. If people want to find out, they can reach out to me individually. But whoever the damn Republican is, I'm going to fight my ass off to make sure that they win, because otherwise this state is toast. But that has to be the attitude on the national level. So ask yourself, what is it that I can do to actually change things? To sit in the bleachers and complain that the president isn't doing this, that, and the other thing, or to actually go out and change my fellow citizens enough that we secure at least the next 2 years. And then the fight starts all over again.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for everyone tuning in so far. The next question I'm going to take is going to be from a retired United States Navy commander who has a really simple question, but I think we should revisit this. So thank you, Michael, for your question here. So happy to have found Promethean. You opened my eyes to a new way of seeing national security. Retired United States Navy commander with several tours of NATO National Security Fellowship at Hoover, Navy War College, tours in Bosnia and Saudi where I deployed. Also worked at Department of State in Iraq 2004-5. Feel like most of what I learned was based on faulty premises. However, after dealing with the Mideast senior staff in Saudi Arabia and Iraq and working Bosnia peacekeeping, I have very little trust for Islamic-led nations. Struggling to believe that that Saudi Arabia and Iraq and working, I have very little trust, struggling to believe that UAE, Egypt, and Jordan will ever be trustworthy allies. Seems very risky to deal with them even bilaterally. Understand the need to become economically independent for defense, energy, industry, critical infrastructure, etc. What need do we that would no matter what? Controlling the Strait of Hormuz, or at least making sure it is open, is strategically critical. Long buildup, I know. Will the American system be successful with bilateral agreements with Islamic-based nations? Secondly, do we even need the United Nations anymore? Thank you for all you do. Thank you, Michael, for sending in your question. Barbara and Susan, your thoughts on this one?
Well, I mean, part of the problem here is that you identify the problem as Islam in many respects. But if you really look at all of these nations, I would say that the bigger problem is British geopolitical thinking, which has dominated the entire area for, ever since Sykes-Picot, really. The difficulty is that what the president is doing through the Abraham Accords, through trying to create a situation between Israel and these Gulf state nations, which is sort of coming to fruition, is the idea that building things, peace through development, is at the center of everything you're doing. And when you're dealing with different cultures, what you really want to do, what the United States did, unfortunately, at British instigation, was to support, in my view, the wrong side of Islamic culture. That is, we used the jihadis to fight the Soviet Union. We supported them, and we basically created that as a very dominant, sort of brand of Islamic fundamentalism. And then when the chickens came home to roost in 9/11 and otherwise, we sort of didn't recognize what it was that we had, in fact, facilitated or done. Then you got ISIS coming off of Iraq and everything else. And so we through our stupid, adoption of British counterinsurgency strategies, actually thought that we could use this as a tool, first to fight the Soviets, and then we used it as a tool to sort of create a permanent warfare kind of strategy in the Middle East. And the British hand is still very deep in all of this. If you actually take a look at the City of London and any of these states, the City of London was saying, I've got my hands so deep in these Gulf states that I can depend on oil income coming my way for the rest of the century. Donald Trump just blew all that apart. And he's blown it apart ever since his first administration, when he went first to Saudi Arabia and said openly, hey, we're not doing terrorism anymore. If you basically want the support of the United States, we'll help you diversify your economies so you're not dependent on oil, and let's build something together. But we're not doing terrorism anymore. So get that straight. We're going to oppose terrorism, and we expect you to join us in that fight in your countries. Now, this is a deep problem. It's called the Muslim Brotherhood. Very specifically, it is a British tool for subversion of the entire area. And really, what we're dealing with here is that we have to call forth not this brand of Islam, but the great tradition of, in Iran, for example, Persian culture, which was very much integrated with Spain and the West and everything else. We have to call forth the highest forms of Islam, which are very much coherent with Platonism and other things like that. Because the way you want to deal with this on a cultural level is to show people that there is really a better way and a deeper way, and something which fundamentally touches on all human beings, which makes the three great, think about it, the Abraham Accords. What's Trump talking about? The three great Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, coming together to build their way out of the mess created by using religion as a tool for warfare. And that's a difficult problem to wrap your hands around, but it is essentially, I think, the direction we need to go.
I also just want to point out that on the Promethean Action website, we actually have a very important in-depth dossier on how the British created political Islam. Islamic fundamentalism, which is what people are constantly freaking out about, but that this was the deliberate support and fostering of these indeed dangerous ideologies and political movements for a larger geopolitical purpose. That is a brief which you can find on the Promethean Action website. It's what we monthly, we provide a special in-depth briefing to our paid subscribers. But in this case, we felt it was so important that people understood this that we made it available to everybody. So it is there on our website. And seriously, I recommend that if you haven't read this and you don't at least have this historical understanding under your belt, you may still disagree with what we have to say, but at least you're going to be disagreeing from the standpoint of knowing something.
Thank you, Susan and Barbara. So yes, people, if you go to PrometheanAction.com and you just search for the Empire's Jihad, it'll come, or you could probably type the Empire's Jihad right into Google, put Promethean something after it. I'm sure it'll come right up. This is actually free to all of our members. You don't have to be a paid subscriber. We release this one to everyone. So you just have to be signed up on our website. Even as a free subscriber, you can download it. So everyone should go ahead and check that out. Okay, I think we've come to the end of our 2-hour show. I just want to say we may not be having a live show next Thursday. That's not been decided or fully worked out yet. We'll probably know more. I'm actually driving across country, relocating my life. So we may not be doing it next Thursday. I'm going to see, depending, because I'm going to be driving across country. So we'll see if I have the bandwidth or the spot to do that. But we'll let everyone know probably by next Tuesday when I send out the announcement. Barbara and Susan, any last words for our audience today?
Yeah, I think kind of, go back and listen to things we said today, because it really deals with the first question, all right? You have to look at what's going on out there and think about how it's impacting your friends and neighbors, which is just a gigantic cyber operation designed to take your eye off the ball. And the ball is the midterm elections, okay? That's what we're focused on. That's what we got to be focused on, telling what has been accomplished. The media will not cover it. They're still back in the same mindset. Trump is a buffoon. He hurts himself by talking. He should just shut up, and then everything would be cool. It's all nonsense. JD versus Marco, all this stuff has nothing to do with the reality of what the administration is out there fighting and what they're trying to accomplish. Read the fundamental documents. Go back and read the national security strategy of the United States on the White House website, and then think about the application which is going on with the war in Iran. And we'll sort a lot of things out for you, I promise.
Yeah, and I would just say, because I know everyone is going to be, is on the edge of their seat in terms of tonight, Again, I'm not going to forecast what Donald Trump is going to do because he's Donald Trump, and I've learned well enough by now. But whatever he does, don't be a Monday morning quarterback. Again, focus on what you can actually do to affect, especially these midterm elections. What can you do in a positive sense? And honestly, if every single person who looks at the world, the way we do, gets 10 people out to vote who wouldn't have otherwise voted, that could be decisive in the midterm elections. So what do you have to do that? How do you have to think? What are the issues you need to talk about with people? How do you find people? That's where we need to be putting our passion. Donald Trump is going to do what Donald Trump does. I was at a meeting recently where someone said, there were people say to Trump, please don't endorse in some of these races. And, the people who were the liaison said, do you think Donald Trump, relies on anybody for these decisions? Donald Trump is Donald Trump. He does what he does. He's a commander in chief. And so far, I think he's been pretty damn brilliant in terms of where we are in this battle against the British imperial system. So, again, as Barbara said, keep your mind in the real fight. However this battle unfolds over tonight, please don't get your panties in too much of a bunch if he doesn't do what you want him to do.
Thank you, everyone. Make sure you're subscribed to our email newsletter, and we'll see you very soon. Thank you.